Yeah, so my name's Steve Leeper. I teach animation at Central Michigan University, work on short films. This is the second higher ed program I've been able to put into place, and we've been going strong for the last 8 years. I love storytelling, visual storytelling, cinematography, and stop motion. Those are kind of my passions.
Can you go over, I guess, your early childhood and what inspirations, whether it's media, literature, or things around your life that kind of inspired you to go into art and animation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you know, early on, I was very smitten by stories.
Mm,
I was raised very religious, so we were in church all the time. But the stories in Sunday school were really
mhm,
quite captivating. The rest of the culture around it, I found quite suffocating. And the
hmm,
older I got, the more questions I'd ask, and the more I I I get a lot of maybe dead ends, or it was um, well, there's two halves to this, right? There was um, my my father died when I was very young, and because of this, my mom, with three kids, worked at a summer camp for a good 4 or 5 years, and that meant when I was 4 years old, I had the run of the place. And so the kind of religious experience at this summer camp was very heady and very exciting, and there was always young people around. And one of my key influences, um, going back that far, was that this was in the state of Michigan, and Michigan had a law. I don't know if they still have it on the books, but if you were at a camp overnight, they had to give you 1 hour on your back to rest. They called it horizontal hour. But because I wasn't officially a camper, I could do anything I wanted during that horizontal hour. And the director of the camp at the time, his name was John Harper, and he would play audio stories over the PA system at horizontal hour. And I remember, have vivid memories of sitting outside the pool under the speaker, listening to like the whole story of Bambi performed in audio, and Jimmy Stewart doing Winnie the Pooh tales. And so I think from a very early age, I was just really taken with both stories, and I love to draw. So I guess it was sort of inevitable I'd end up in animation at some point. Oddly enough, we films were frowned upon, right? Going to movies was, so this is quite a bit earlier than your experience with Veggie-tales, right? And
yeah.
and so um, I now I was able to get to comic books, and so those I enjoyed a lot. Some of my earliest movies that I saw, well, Bambi was one, Pinocchio. Um, yeah, I think I was just kind of taken in with all that, but I think at the core of it was really the storytelling. And if we were to fast forward after I just after I graduated, and found that I didn't have the means to make films, I really leaned into storytelling and reading stories and doing oral interpretation of stories. And so there's always been that thread. Even when I couldn't make films, I was always interested in putting stories in front of people. So yeah, and those Bible stories were hugely influential. I knew that I love to draw, and I wanted to do that for a living. I didn't know any artists, any professional artists, no one working. Anyone I knew they made art as a hobby. And I do remember pretty early on going, I do not want to make art as a hobby, right? This is something I want to do. I didn't know what that would be, and that took a while. I didn't do well in high school, um, um, for a lot of reasons. Attention span probably had a lot to do with it. But soon after high school, I was taking graphic design courses at the community college, and really trying to find a way to maybe make some money with my talents. And it took me a while to kind of get my life straightened out. I made some pretty bad choices when I was that age, and I ended up actually going from um, being a pretty hardcore party animal to realizing that this is not going to end well, and and so I found my way back to a Bible college that my
Mm-hmm.
parents had met at, and it was in part to kind of get this faith monkey off my back. I
Mm-hmm.
had been running from it, and I was very skeptical. And I remember walking in the door of this small college, thinking, "This is either all ridiculous, and we're gonna put this to bed once and for all,
Mm-hmm.
or there's something here that I need to take seriously." And within, I'd say, the first 3 or 4 weeks, and I did not study in high school at all, but I was kind of desperate. And within the first few weeks, I was really taken with how these stories connected in a larger kind of a larger narrative. And I think that's what that and meeting my future wife sort of held me there for a little bit. And there was a one professor I mentioned to you earlier when we were talking about this camp director, John Harper.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up being one of the teachers there that really took me under his wing, and he was an amazing storyteller and a great lover of the arts. And I think that was the first time I was able to connect a sense of faith with art making and storytelling, not as a ministry or not as a tool to kind of convert people, but as a just a um, as a way to kind of come to terms with larger questions, which
Yeah,
was
that makes
very
sense.
mine. Yeah. So from there, I was kind of convinced I needed to do something with my skills, and I ended up, from this semester long interaction with John Harper, being pretty convicted about leaning heavily into the arts. And so I started doing my research for schools, and I ended up going to the museum school in Boston, the School of Museum of Fine Art in Boston, not because they did animation. I had, again, no real interest in animation, or at least I didn't think I did. I had a passing interest in animation, and then I found out that it took 24 drawings a second, and I thought that's
Yeah.
crazy. So I went off to art school to just really um, explore my talents. I had no idea what I was getting into. At the time, the museum school was a very avant-garde. The idea of representational art was considered to be taboo. You weren't
Mm-hmm.
supposed to draw things that people recognized, and you weren't supposed to tell stories. These were the two things that the art world had decided was no longer valid. And there I was, a storyteller, and I wanted to paint pictures. So the only place I could really survive there was in the animation department. And I just got busy making work. Pretty fascinated with those early flip books, and I had a professor, Flip Johnson, who must have seen something in me, and encouraged me to sort of lean into this next class. It was kind of leapfrogging over some of the early classes, and says, I think by next semester you could be making a film. So sophomore year, really not knowing anything about what I was doing, which might have been the saving grace, I made a 3.5 minute watercolor animated film in a semester, which I would never ask my students to do today.
Well,
That's
that
just
sounds like a lot of work. Yeah.
that's a lot of work. But I didn't know any better, right? And I think that, boy, that I was hooked. Working with musicians, just seeing, not just scribbling on flip books and watching things move, but actually seeing a full-on story come to life and get projected on a screen, and something that I could actually send out to festivals. That was that was intoxicating. So that was when I was hooked.
That's really interesting. I think Yeah, I was just thinking about, yeah, a watercolor film, like, have you ever attempted that ever again after that? Or
Well, I did. My second film was also done with watercolors. The thing is about the museum school; they were very anti-establishment. They were very
yeah.
anti-commerce. They didn't like Disney. They didn't want right. They were they they wanted me to be making abstract films. I thought that story would surely be accepted in the animation department, and
Yeah.
even there, they were saying no. It's visuals, it's abstraction, and I have to say that the experimental work that I encountered there, even though I didn't really understand it, there was something that was very engaging about the abstract qualities of the work. And artists
Mhm.
like Norman McLaren and um, Susan Pitt and some of these very edgy, um, um, they would work somewhat in narrative, but they were more interested in exploring the form of animation.
Mhm.
Um, so even though I was a storyteller and I wanted to make children's films, which was also like not something that was encouraged, right? It was very much kind of a place to make dark introspective work, right? And but what I found was that there were some heroes, some filmmakers that they were showing there. Yuri Norstein from Russia that makes what's been claimed some of the most beautiful animated films in the world, and he was making them for children. Ko Hodeman from the Canadian Film Board won the Academy Award with a children's film. So even though they were saying on one hand, you
Yeah.
really got to give up this silly kid stuff and get serious about making real art. On the other hand, the stuff that they were showing us was children's films. And I have a real affinity towards this idea that if you can frame an idea in a way that a child can connect with it without condescending,
Mhm.
without watering it down, um, there's a very good chance that you're connecting with a much larger audience.
No, no, I 100% agree. Yeah.
So, so that was yeah, that was the museum school. So I guess what I started to say was that whole experimental technique. They wouldn't let us do cell painting, right? In fact, the drawings that I started out for my first film, it's called Please Don't Feed the Animals. It was just a childhood memory of being at the zoo, and the images, I was trying to emulate Disney. I was trying to copy what
Mhm.
I had seen, and I was quickly discouraged. And I'm glad too, right? I mean, it's they could have done a better job of maybe drawing out the things that interested me, but I
Yeah.
am glad that I was redirected.
Mhm.
And Flip Johnson was an amazing animator. His work in watercolors was quite stunning, um, and beautiful. And so adopting his workflow, but turning it towards children's films seemed to be a good fit.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think also when I was in school too, there was also a notion kinda similar to that, and this is like only 2 years ago, was that, like, there was a more focus on let's push animation towards just experimental. But I think kinda like you said, I think you can kinda have both, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's the most important part. Because I agree, like, I don't 'cause I also wanted to go to more Disney-esque stuff or something more like that, but I was encouraged to go more abstract with it, which I think that eventually made more of a happy medium.
yeah. And to this day when I teach, like I show all the weird stuff, right?
Mhm.
Because I think it's incredibly engaging. But the but there's no need to dismiss or demonize the other, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
both. Animation can be, you know, whatever it wants to be. And I think what I was able to take away from my years in Boston was a real appreciation for the abstract. And I knew that my films had to work at some level as an abstraction, or they wouldn't have let me make them. and
Mhm.
and because film is primarily a visual medium, I think that's been very good for my work, right? And so cinematography, to this day, I'm just fascinated with how an image moves on a screen. Doesn't need a story to be
Yeah.
fascinating, it just needs to be beautiful. So um so taking that, harnessing that abstraction, and using it as a means to tell a story. Like you said, I think that's the best of both worlds.
Yeah. And I guess so after you finished school, did you have a big idea right away, or what was kind of lead up to that? How did you get to that point?
So, so I went to art school a little bit late. I kind of told you about a little bit of
Yeah.
my background, and so by the time I got to art school, I was in my 20s,
Mhm.
and so I was married and had a kid on the way by the time I graduated. I had made one more film called Traveling Show, another watercolor film, and and they were both kind of getting put out there into the festivals. Um, it gave me a pretty strong portfolio, but not a very conventional portfolio,
Yeah.
right? So and so I'd grown up in the Chicago area and had done a little bit of research. There was no internet then, but there was Animation Magazine. And Animation Magazine would once a year would publish the guide to animation studios.
Mhm.
So I think you'd pay $50 for it or $25 for it, and they'd mail it to you. And Chicago had this huge listing of animation studios. And because we had a kid on the way, and I was thinking, well, it'd be good to be around family.
Mhm.
And so we moved to Chicago and I just started knocking on doors. I'd sent videotapes out to every studio that I could get to answer, to pick up the phone, right?
Mhm.
And it did turn out that this very, very long list of studios, many of them no longer existed. And a lot of the ones that did exist had just converted into post houses.
Oh.
So this is pre After Effects, but
Yeah.
definitely a lot of spinning logos and 3D stuff.
Mhm.
So it turned out that there was just a handful of studios that were doing traditional animation, drawn animation. And so I made the rounds. And because of the work I did on my films, I knew camera work very well. And I was very fortunate. There was a Sione Artworks was a studio in Chicago that had the exact Oxbury animation stand that I'd made my films on. And they needed a cameraman. Their cameraman was retired. And so everything about it, same computer, same everything. So I was able to step into that gig and keep the money coming in, and at the same time freelance around doing some assistant animation and some animation, because as a freelancer you were always trying to make sure you had work, right?
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
wasn't, there was no such thing as, at least not in the studios in Chicago that I knew of. There were a handful of permanent positions, but the rest of us were hired guns.
Mhm.
So if you got 3 weeks worth of work, 5 weeks worth of work, man, that was something. And while you were doing that, you were fishing around for your next gig. So the camera work was a good steady income.
Mhm.
And well, there was one other thing that just before I left Boston, um, Amy Kravitz and Steve Subotnick, who taught at RISD, came down from Providence, Rhode Island, while my professor Flip Johnson was on sabbatical. And I got 1 year, my last year, I got a dose of RISD animation, which was just a very different approach, and and much more playful. So still very experimental, but much more willing to play and not so serious. And so one class I took was called Three Films in a Semester, which was crazy because I was already making my thesis film. But I did some sand animation, and just enough to get hooked and enough to have some on my reel. So back to Chicago, I'm handing my reel around everywhere, just trying to get work. And I got an interview with Tom Sinnott at Sinnott Studios. They did Captain Crunch primarily; that was their
Okay.
main gig. But they also had a stop motion stage. They were doing some of the Pillsbury Doughboy and some other things. And I was interviewing just to work on the Captain Crunch commercials. But he saw my sand animation and he said, "Hmm, that's that's done under the camera, right?" I said, "Yeah." It says, "I bet you could do stop motion." I said, "Yeah, I bet I could too." And maybe 3 months later, I got a call as an assistant on a stop motion set, and that sort of became a whole new thing. So even the really experimental stuff, right? The really playful, the stuff that you wouldn't think would have any commercial value at all, um, really, at least for me, it was an opportunity to do something completely different. And that allowed me to carve out a niche for myself in Chicago. So, stop motion animation, model making to support stop motion animation, all that kind of stuff became a much easier way to make a living
Mhm.
than when I was just trying to tough it out along with all the other 2D animators.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, no, that I guess, yeah, freelance is still kinda like that. You're just kinda just going gig to gig, really. But,
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know how it's paying now. I
yeah, I
know
don't
that
do freelance, so I don't know, but I know some people who do, and I know it can be really, really rough, so
it's rough because they need to, for a good freelance situation, should pay you enough to get you to your next gig, right?
yeah.
You should make enough while you're working to cover the time when you're not.
Mhm.
And I think what happened for me is when I was doing assistant work for Captain Crunch, it was by the hour. But when I shifted to stop motion and model making, and I had a couple of really good mentors in model making, it was by the day. And that changed everything. And also changed the way I was respected on set. I mean, that
Mm,
was, they didn't call me unless they needed me and unless they were willing to pay me, which was
mhm.
very refreshing after a couple of years of just really grinding things out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what eventually led you to Big Idea?
So, um, when I was early on in Chicago, I was knocking on every door I could find. And a lot of them, as I mentioned, had become post production houses. And a lot of them were doing these shining, spinning logos,
Mhm.
which I had no interest in doing, nor ability. But the films on my reel were children's films for the most part. And I remember interviewing at one place, and they were like, there was a post house, forget exactly which one, but I said, we don't really do anything like that. But there's this guy who comes in and works for us freelance. His name's Phil Vischer,
Mm.
always talking about a kids program he wants to put together. You should talk to him. So I got Phil's number, and we reached out, and we connected immediately. Right? I mean, he's a little bit younger than I was, had a kid, and was using his understanding of software to really push storytelling. The Softimage, this is early 3D,
Yeah.
which was primarily shiny, glossy,
Mhm.
logos and things. And that's how he made some pretty good money. But he was trying to figure out how could we tell stories with this. And that's why the Veggie-tales have no arms, right?
Yeah.
That's why they have no appendages, because those are expensive things, and if you could just reduce them to their basic function and animate them on a lattice. So he was trying to do this very scrappy, bare bones approach to storytelling, basically from his influence in the puppet theater.
Yeah.
And we would have these interesting conversations because we'd both come out of this Christian background, right? And I was so my take on Christian media was, why bother?
Mhm.
It's not worth doing. Just make good work,
Well, especially at
right?
the time, right? Like, there wasn't
Oh, at the
much
time was
it was
horrible.
I always said there's, like, Bible Man and stuff, right? So,
Oh, yeah, yeah. It was all very much, yeah. The art of
yeah.
it, and there's still some pretty bad stuff out there now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I think the thing that VeggieTales did was it really elevated the whole thing because of the sense of humor.
Mhm.
Like, it's okay to tell jokes. It's okay to, let's do things that we think are funny, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, right? So Phil and I would have these conversations early on where he felt like the Christian media market was a place where you could launch something truly meaningful, and I just thought, it's like, why would you bother? And
Mm.
in the end, uh, well, I think that conversation is still going on in my head often, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I continued to do the model making and the animating, and every once in a while I would do some sketches. I actually did the original sketch of Junior's living room for Where's God When I'm Scared,
Oh, so
and
you
it
were there in
was,
the very beginning then.
but I wasn't working for him. Like he couldn't, like
Oh,
I had a kid. I had my freelance gigs. I had to, to do to pay the bills. They didn't have any money.
yeah.
But we would get together and have lunch and talk about things. And, I'd throw sketches his way. Phil was not an artist, but he was a phenomenal storyteller.
Yeah.
And we did a couple of things, a couple of freelance things together. And we were talking constantly about when when would they get big enough where I could actually cross over into the studio. Um, and I think that went on for maybe what so Phil and I met in 95, I think. And
Okay.
I ended up starting there in 98. So
Okay, so
could have
it's
been
pretty
earlier. No,
yeah.
I got that wrong. Phil and I must have met because I left Boston in 90. Phil and I must have met around 92. So, um, and I was bouncing around between freelancing, the International Chicago Children's Film Festival. That was a big place for me to sort of lean into and volunteer and do workshops and meet a lot of amazing filmmakers. And then I was also teaching at Columbia College, and that was kind of how I was making my living. And
Hmm.
we've been talking about working together, and it just never really lined up until 98. Uh, and I would say that what happened there was the CG influence, the 3D influence, really kind of knocked the wind out of model making and stop
Hmm.
motion.
Yeah.
And model making was my main bread and butter by then. And so I needed to make a career move. And the Veggie-tales were just getting off the ground.
Like
They
98 you
were
said? Or
98, so they were just about ready to make Madame Blueberry,
yeah.
and Phil had just made a deal. I think they had just gotten on the shelves in Walmart, and so that
Yeah,
gave
I
them
think
enough,
you're right. Yeah.
yeah. So that gave them enough capital to start expanding. And so we met and we talked about how I might be able to contribute. And the thing is, I didn't know anything about computers. Um, so the conversation that we had was around how could I get involved in the production, and how could I learn as I go? Because I knew filmmaking, I knew storytelling, I could sculpt, I could do a lot of things, but nothing on the computer. So
Mhm.
how does that work? And so the plan we put together, which is kind of cool, was like, well, I would work for one production in each department, and then we'd sort it out after that.
Mhm.
And the trick was, well, what department would I start in? And at the time, Daniel Lopez, um, he was a former student of mine from Columbia College, and he was heading up the modeling department. And he said, "Sure, Steve wants to learn how to model. Put him in my department." So, former student
Yeah.
becomes my teacher, and I had a pretty good aptitude because I sculpted, so I had a pretty good aptitude. It was just a matter of figuring out how this computer worked, and spent the first month modeling Madame Blueberry's living room.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was quite the learning curve. So that's how I got. That's how and I would say that while I was working on Madame Blueberry, so it's pretty interesting. Um, the It was a really warm working environment, right? As you can
Yeah,
imagine.
that's what I hear. I heard it was a very great place
Just
to
a
work.
Yeah, just a lot of very young artists. The vibe there was like, hey, we're doing something new and interesting, and it's good for people.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, there was a little bit of that edge of like, not everybody there was religious, but
Mhm.
people knew better than to like be dropping the F bomb all the time, and right.
Yeah,
So it was
yeah.
kind of it was a nice, happy place. until
Okay.
we started. So the workflow at the time was everybody would build, the modeling department would build all the assets. And then the lighting department would load those assets into scenes and light them. And so I just remember working on Madame Blueberry's living room and thinking, wow, this is crazy. So this is how computer animation is done. We had these drawings and everybody was kind of working on their own and we were just doing this really great stuff and we weren't bothered by anybody. And I thought, this is fascinating because if this was stop motion, there would be all these checks and balances and things, but looks like everybody just has a great time. And we got done modeling the living room, sent our models over to lighting, and we crashed the system because there's
Oh.
no way that one soft image file could hold all those polygons.
Hmm.
And then these really happy, nice people got a little pissy
Hmm.
because things were falling apart. Because
Yeah.
their workflow was kind of based on three guys in a bedroom and post-it notes.
Yeah.
And we had by Madame Blueberry, we had grown to maybe 40 production artists, and they
Wow.
really didn't have a clear system about how to get everyone on the same page. And so at that point, I forget the VP of production. He wasn't there very long. His name was Mark, and he had been reading about how Toy Story was utilizing this new 3D layout because our workflow was based very much on 2D Disney,
Yes. Yeah.
if that makes sense.
That makes sense. I could. Well, yeah, I could tell a lot.
Okay. And so there was this idea of a 3D layout department. What would that look like? And I had one article on Toy Story that I read. And so this plan where I would move around a lot came to an end pretty quickly. And I was asked to start working on building a layout department.
Wow.
And and that made a lot of sense to me because coming out of stop motion, like in stop motion, you don't build anything unless you need it.
Exactly.
And you,
Yeah.
and you only build the sides that get shown to the camera.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't know where the camera's going to be, you go back for another client meeting or you tell them you need a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And since we didn't have a lot of money, this idea of placing the camera first against a mock-up set and working very quickly to prototype the film and then locking it down and handing it down the production line, that made perfect sense to me coming out of stop motion. And so the trick is how do we build that in a CG studio framework?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, Henry Vera was the our Maya rep or our
Mm-hmm.
Alias Wavefront rep, and he was hoping to get a job with us. And Henry and I sat down, and he is an amazing programmer. And between the two of us, we came up with we kind of built a pipeline based around layout. So all the storyboards go into layout, and all the production files flow out of layout. And that changed, radically changed how we work. And so, now when it came to building something like Madame Blueberry's living room, you only build what the camera sees.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, you had to be there. It was pretty insane. The things we were building,
Yeah. I've seen
crazy.
lots of behind the scenes documentaries that at least kind of showcase a little bit of that culture. But it's interesting to hear about that from, I guess, your firsthand experience. Because yeah, I mean, because like, I mean, I really think about it. It's really crazy because like, yeah, Toy Story was like the only 3D film at the time, so you guys kind of had to make a lot of things from scratch, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, and a lot of it. So a lot of the thinking did come from rumors that we had heard, an article that I had read,
yeah.
and a stop motion workflow that I understood very well. Right. I just remember. I remember we had the textures on Madame Blueberry's living room. There was this fine layer of dust that if you picked up the lamp, you could see that it had been right.
Yeah.
But the problem was nobody ever picked up the lamp because it wasn't in the story, right?
Yeah.
It was an investment in details because this is what artists do, right?
Yeah.
You say, here, make this beautiful. And we do, and we make it even more beautiful than we're asked.
Mhm.
Um, and instead of setting up boundaries and saying, okay, but you only have this many polygons, which was one attempt to regulate us, which just did not go over well. What we did with layout, we said, here's the scene, here's the camera. Look through the camera, and then you decide where you're going to put your effort, right? And even the director approvals for modeling were very much like, ooh, that's so beautiful. Can I look at that closer? And you would get seduced by how cool it could be.
Mhm.
And we changed that culture to do your reviews through the camera. Because if it's sitting halfway across the room, don't waste don't waste your time. Just make it work. Very much how you build props in theater, right?
Mhm.
That distance from the audience, nobody cares. Spend your time on the stuff that the audience does care about.
Exactly, yeah.
So that was and from there we were able to do the blocking and the cinematography, and I think for me it was a great fit because it wasn't about the details. It was the major steps in getting a story to a film done, right? And then to me the rest was kind of details. Like once the blocking works, if you can sell that story with relatively wooden animation, strong blocking, and good camera moves, that makes it easier for everybody else.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess to continue off of that, so I guess when you guys got to Jonah, um, that was like a big leap forward, right? Like that was I've heard a lot of different things about that. And I guess a double question too is that like and it is a touchy subject, it's fine. Did you notice things were not going as maybe as smooth around that point? Because I mean, I'm just really I hear so many different things and I hear things from my aunt. She was let go right after Jonah. I actually went to the premiere of that movie too. I was like 2 years old.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah, I
Wow.
did. Yeah, I met I think I met Lisa Fisher there too. Um,
At 2 years old.
yeah, I did at the because like they had it. I think the premiere. I believe it's downtown Disney at the time.
The premiere was downtown at one of the downtown cinemas that where all the big blockbuster movies would come out.
Yeah,
Yeah, we rented that theater space. And a bunch of folks got laid off that day
yeah,
with your aunt. Yeah. But I would lead with this, right? I mean, we were a young company that was taking huge risks and doing some pretty cool stuff. And I think there's been some uncharitable criticism of how things were handled. But you have to understand if you're going to get on board with somebody who's doing, like, taking those kind of risks
mhm,
to do the things that we did, it's not fair to turn around and go, well, how come we didn't have the stability of a Disney or
yeah,
the right, or how come um, mistakes were absolutely made, and in retrospect, I really I wish Phil would have had a board of directors, that would have given him the kind of support that he needed.
that's what I've heard
But
too. Yeah,
at the end of the day, the chutzpah that kicked Veggie-tales off is what got us pretty far. So I just want to, maybe anything I have to say, I would put in that framework, that I'm really
yeah,
grateful for the opportunity to work with some artists that I never would have gotten the opportunity to work with, and we made some stuff that really impacted a generation. I've been teaching for 20 years now, right? And well, let's back up again to those conversations that Phil and I were having, right?
yeah,
About is Christian is the Christian niche culture even worth preserving? And I would say no, it's not. And I would say that now probably more than ever, right?
mhm,
It's not about a niche culture. It's about these stories. It's about this truth that we need to put out into the world. Um, and and Phil had a unique way of leveraging that niche culture to grow something pretty wonderful. I never would have been able to do that. My interest in working at Veggie-tales always had to do with the ability to cross outside of that culture, because
yeah,
that culture is not the culture that needs to hear these stories, or
mhm.
right, or
I
if they
agree.
need to
Yeah,
hear them, maybe they need to hear them a little differently than they've been telling themselves these stories. So so that being said, one of the things that we were always trying to do is we were trying to be more efficient in the way that
Mhm.
we work. And we thought that if we could work faster and less waste, we could produce more.
Mhm.
But we always had this problem of when you give artists more efficient tools, they make it even cooler.
Mhm.
Like so we the work we were doing just kept getting better, but it wasn't really fitting the business model.
Mhm.
Because the business model just wanted 2 videos a year, right?
Mhm.
And so I think at some point, I remember people were taking our videos, they were buying them off the shelves in Walmart, and they were setting them up in theaters and having these projection nights.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that got Phil to thinking about, well, maybe we should be thinking about making films that could actually be shown in theaters. If the
Mhm.
work we're doing wants to be consumed at that level. So we're trying to do two things at once: push the film studio to do bigger, better, more cinematic, and then start creating some side projects that we could just drop into the market on video that don't cost as much to make. And I don't know if that ever really worked out because we just kept making everything really expensive.
Yeah.
Um, so right around Esther, Esther was our first real exploration into cinematic storytelling.
Mhm.
Right? It was less a Bible lesson, more a story about courage. Um, and so the work that we did in layout and the work that was the way the story was written and the sets were designed was very much a more dramatic piece.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the first time in layout we really pushed our cinematic chops. Um, and we found that that's a very expensive way to work, and that we had some serious work to do on the pipeline if we were going to take it to that next level.
Yeah.
So we made a deal with Phil basically. So I was the head of layout, and there were 5 of us that were running the studio at the time, the film studio, because we had lost our VP of production back at, what production was it? I think it was the King. It was right after Madame Blueberry. It was Larry Boy and the Rumor Weed. We lost our VP of production. We've been looking for someone ever since, and so we made a deal with Phil that to slow down on the cinematic ambitions, to take it down a notch, so that we could work on retooling the pipeline for a feature film. So Lyle in The Kindly Viking, and then is it Amleto?
Yeah.
The Tim Hodge directed, by the way. That was an attempt to take it down a notch and be back to more clever. And it's really Lyle is one of my favorite shows. I think Lyle was maybe the first time someone introduced, hey, Tim introduced, why don't we do a pop up book? Because if we do a pop up book, we don't have to make the water look real. Just because there's water doesn't mean it has to be real, right?
Yeah.
Um, because we'd gotten that sort of bug that I think CG artists get, that it's like, oh, look, a new plugin, look what we can do, right? So that stylistic choice of making a pop-up book for Lyle and the Kindly Viking made that one of the smoothest productions that we had done. And that allowed us a little bit of time to retool and then come back to Jonah.
Mhm.
But I still think we may have underestimated just how much work a feature film is. It's not just 3 times the length
Yeah.
of a half-hour video, the cinematic weight, everything about it. And for me personally, because that has a lot to do with cinematography and scene planning, which is at the heart of layout, um, we took a lot of grief. I think we met our deadlines, but there was always a like, well, how come you guys are how come you're taking so long to do what you're doing? Couldn't you work faster and then let the animators or it's like, no, man, this stuff takes time, right?
Yeah.
And so there was kind of a real push on the front end to get going, and it's like, wait a minute, planning well on a journey like Jonah, that's a very smart move. So don't panic. And I think what was really helpful was at the time Dan Phillips came from DreamWorks and became our VP of production. And Amik Owens, she was a producer, and her husband Tom came from DreamWorks. And so we had an influx of talent that had worked on larger films, and that brought a little bit more stability to a pretty young workforce. But there was still quite a bit of tension
Hmm.
around my the best analogy I have for it is we were trying to push old growth trees through a sawmill designed for young pines, right?
Mm.
And the thought was, we'll just push harder. It's like, no, don't. Let's stop. Let's think this through. Um, so yeah, it was a lot, but turned out good.
No, yeah, I think it turned out great, and I always tell this when I talk to anyone from Big Idea is that, like, I think honestly the biggest accomplishment that all of you have done is that you're able to, like, get these stories out, especially to people who might not be from that faith, that also love it a lot. And also, I know for a fact, I mean, maybe your students have said so too, is that I think Veggie-tales, all the work you've done, inspired, I think, honestly, a generation of many different artists. I think that's a giant accomplishment.
Well, that was the train of thought I lost. What was kind of exciting for me is, uh, so we went on to set up an animation program at Huntington University. It's a Christian college, and that's kind of a no brainer, right? But
Hmm.
9 years ago now, 8.5 years ago, we moved up here to Michigan and started this program up at Central Michigan University, a state school.
Hmm.
And the first day I walked in, there were kids humming Veggie-tales, right? And what I found out was that, unbeknownst to me, there was a whole culture of kids that had nothing to do with church
Hmm.
that had a real fondness for these films. And that means more to me than all the Sunday school classes in the world that are using Veggie-tales to sort of entertain their kids, right?
Yeah,
I think that these stories are powerful, wonderful. I think they belong to the world. I don't think they belong to a subset.
I
And
agree. Yeah.
and we got them out there, and people laughed at them, and even people that thought maybe they wouldn't appreciate them found out that there was just something there to be appreciated. So that's the part that I'm really super proud of. And Jonah's good looking film, man.
No, I mean that was before Finding Nemo, and that water looks crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was Henry Vera and his team, man. They did a I mean, the tools that we developed, and that's the thing. We had 200 artists working on a feature film in a shopping mall in Lombard, Illinois, right?
Hmm.
And we took that out to LA to do all the post production work on it, and to get it colorized and things like that, and color scaled. But the response we were getting from the folks in LA was like, "This is really good work," um, and we managed to carry some of that, sort of keep it simple, but a lot of it was just the tools that we had developed to be so efficient. We were able to pull it off, and it would have been awesome to be able to make a second film with everything that we had learned on that first
Yeah.
film, but that just wasn't going to be the case. So at the very beginning of this interview, I told you I was raised in art school that was very anti-establishment and had no love for the commercial industry, right?
Yeah.
So that makes me a snob. um, I think there was something really special about those first years at Big Idea, and I think
Hmm.
that the work that was done there has an intensity to it that is quite wonderful.
Oh yeah.
I'm not sure that once the studio fell apart, that any of that ever really was going to live on. And you see this you see this in Popeye cartoons. You see this in, right, like just because the characters are there, there's something about the moment in history
Yeah,
that where that happened, and and you saw it with the Muppets, right?
yeah.
So I'm not so sure I want to see another Veggie-tale movie.
I don't necessarily either. I think what you guys made is perfect as is.
I think it's and perfect or flawed, whatever. I just kind of feel like I feel like the interests of doing that, like I don't think Phil's interested in doing that.
Yeah, I think he said he wasn't interested. I know Mike said that he was intrigued by the idea. I don't know how far he had gotten to that film at all, if he's been working on it.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, hey, more power to them. If some of the original folks are getting together and they're trying to put that lightning back in the bottle, but I don't, I don't have a real need for that in my life. So we'll see. I
Yeah.
kind of I kind of haven't really been tracking. We would drop in once in a while and see what's been done, but um, yeah, I'm kind of. I think the real legacy at Big Idea was like this conversation we're having.
Hmm.
The artists that went on from there to do some pretty amazing
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
Brian Ballinger and I went on to build an animation program at Huntington University, and now we've got over 100 animators studying animation at Central Michigan. So, like, that's a legacy that I'm really kind of interested in following.
Yeah, no, I guess continue on that. So if you talk more about like your current program and what you teach students, and also one thing that I guess when I was in school is that my professor who he taught at Cal Arts for a while, his approach to the program was kind of a lot more how I guess your approach was when we went to I guess the Boston school. But I guess the difference though with that is that there was no really room for I guess taking modern inspiration or modern ideas or modern techniques at all. And I think, I mean, yeah, I'm not, it seems that the way you teach your students is very, very hands on. So I kind of just wonder, yeah, what is the method you teach and do you kind of prepare students for the industry? Is that something maybe everyone needs to learn themselves? I've learned a lot of lessons about the animation industry, just on my own. Um, but yeah, I'm just kind of curious how your program works and everything.
Students are paying way too much money not to be learning everything they can about making their way in whatever field they choose.
Hmm.
And to decide for them ahead of time what they should and shouldn't know, coming from a bias, like, and I feel like, a lot of what I've done in setting up the programs I've been teaching in have been an anecdote to the things I didn't get, as well as some things that I did, right? So I want to be careful with that.
Hmm.
And I really chafed against this idea of being told that stories were dead. It's like, excuse me, we have been around on this
Yeah.
planet for a very long time, and stories are not, nor will they ever be dead, right? So that really bothered me, that I wanted to make children's films and I wanted to tell stories, and I had to really wrestle my instructors to get that out of them, that, and and yet I have a great appreciation for the stuff that they did show me, and so that could have been handled very differently. i
Hmm.
think i think that could have, and so that's what we're trying to do here, right? Like, I love showing them Norman McLaren on the very first day of classes and have everybody go like, what are we watching? This is crazy, right? And
Yeah.
really learn to appreciate it, not because it's serious art, but because it's like, this is how grown-ups play. It's amazing. This is a fantastic art form. But also, there are amazing things that have been done in the industry. We don't show a lot of industry work in classes because I want to be like they watch that stuff on their own,
Yeah.
right?
That's fair.
So we
Yeah.
try very much to keep what we're showing them, and that's changing too, by the way, because we're also bringing in. We have four full-time animators. We'll be looking for our fifth animator this year, right? And they're going to bring their own philosophy. So that's the other thing too. I try not to be a real gatekeeper on what's
Hmm.
allowed, but I like I like disrupting and being very mischievous about things. The way we raised our kids was because I am a snob, and it became apparent that I was being awfully critical of things that they were just excited about, like Pokemon. I really don't care, right? But I had to tell myself, don't let them know you don't care, right? Because that's just like stealing their childhood. That's not fair, right? So my wife and I tried to fill the house with really good books and good movies because I was raised being told I couldn't watch movies. This is good, this is bad. And I
Mhm.
hate that gatekeeping stuff. So the theory was if we load up the house with really good stuff, good music, good, and then every once in a while they'll bring in something. And if what they bring in isn't quite as good, they don't need to know that.
Yeah.
And we might be wrong. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
what I decided wasn't any good because I'm old and right might be really, really awesome. I just need to give it a chance. That's up to them. And I can't tell them, like, people connect to art in so many different ways and for
Yeah.
so many different reasons. It's not really up to me to decide for them what's good and what isn't. So for animation, I try to lead with play and enthusiasm. I
Yeah.
think that's what kind of goes into people come to study animation because they're just so excited about it.
Mhm.
Um, Having someone excited is more than halfway there when it comes to animation.
Yeah.
And if we shut that down, I mean, animation is going to be hard work,
Mhm.
right? It's going to be really hard work. And so that I will tell them on the first day, like, you better love this stuff because if you don't,
Yeah, you
get
have to
out
love it.
now,
Yeah.
right? But but tamping down that enthusiasm, it feels like that's just wrong. I was thrown out of high school. We started with I didn't do well in high school. I
Mhm.
was asked to leave, right?
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't because I wasn't smart, and it wasn't because I wasn't interested. I think I could have been interested, but they weren't making it interesting.
Mhm.
Now, I'm sure I have a lot of personal blame to carry with that, but I do know that I've got a room full of kids. They're wide eyed and they're like, we just want to study cartoons. And they will do anything you ask them to do. And to squander that is, I think it's malpractice. So
Yeah.
that's what we lead with is sort of this enthusiasm. Jump in. The intro class is designed to have successes early on. Walk cycles, lip syncs, where you're actually making characters come to
Yeah.
life and speak your own stories. Um, One of the things we try to do is you're not practicing to make art. From the minute you walk in the door, you're making art.
Yeah.
So each one of the assignments in the intro class is designed to succeed in a way that you would be proud of it and post it. Because and some of the work that the freshmen are doing. So here's this one I love. Assigning like the first walk cycle, because most of the students aren't any good, the walk cycles are hilarious. They have so much character. Once they start to learn walk cycles. I mean, it's not that we don't teach them. Well, we teach them the formula how to make a walk cycle,
Mhm.
but we don't say make a drunken walk cycle. But
Mhm.
sometimes that's what they end up with, and they're so funny, right? Or so it's kind of like what you discover in this medium that you don't quite have command over yet is pretty wonderful. Then you get to this gawky adolescence where somebody really lays in and teaches you how to do a walk cycle, and your walk cycle is stiff, it's not very interesting, and it doesn't really portray the character that you want to portray.
Mhm.
That's part of what you're going to have to go through. That's just part of that's adolescence, right?
Yeah.
But man, those early on walk cycles are the best, right? It's going to be a long time before you can get back to that. So we try to do a lot of those kind of assignments. We try to front load with those things because they're just cool to watch. So I don't know. Does Does that help? Does that give you any?
No, that gives me a lot of insight. And I guess for my last question, I don't want to take too much more of your time. You've been talking for over an hour.
Oh
Um,
man.
yeah, but yeah. For the last question though, so yeah, so I went to school about 2 years ago. I mostly studied traditional animation, stop motion animation. Right after school, I found it very hard to really get in the industry. I knew a lot of people from both New York and LA, and eventually I went back to Penn State and got a job here doing graphic design for statistics. So it's a lots of graphs and charts and a lot of mathematical stuff. I'm learning good stuff from that. But of course, I wanted to go in the more animation film route. And I know there's a lot of other people from my class who are also struggling to do the same. Some are not, maybe not even finding graphic design jobs. Some are just trying to get jobs to get by. So, like, what advice do you have to students about just the animation industry? I know a lot of stuff's evolving right now too. I know a lot of things are changing as well. A lot of things going overseas, and of course, there's AI as well. So I just kind of want your take on that. What advice do you give your students in this crazy animation world?
Yeah, that's um that's definitely elephant in the room, right?
Yeah.
So I've been teaching animation now for 20 years since Big Idea, and teaching in the Midwest. And I will say that if you are studying animation outside of these media centers, that's already a challenge.
Yes.
Now, not an insurmountable challenge, but if you're going to study animation or any form that doesn't have a market close to it,
Mm-hmm.
then you better plan on moving, right?
Yeah.
And and I don't and it's been interesting, the two different cultures from Huntington private Christian college to CMU, a state college. There's a different, just kind of a different culture there. Um, I want to qualify this by saying I used to believe, and I'm not so sure I'm giving up on this yet.
Mm-hmm.
If I give up on it completely, I'll have to stop teaching. Okay. Um, I used to believe, and I think I still do, but we're living in a weird time right now, that animation requires such a diversity of skill sets that if you love this medium and are willing to work your ass off, then there's a place for you. And I only want to say, regardless of talent, but the talent will surface in whatever area of giftedness you have, but you have to work your ass off,
Yeah.
right? So work ethic is really at the work ethic and passion, right? Those two things outweigh talent. Now, that doesn't mean that just because you're passionate and are willing to work hard, you're going to be a character animator. Boy, so we'll try a couple things. This is a very complicated issue, right?
Yeah.
One of them is a 4-year institution. One of the reasons why I'm not teaching at art school is because I don't know how much I really believe in art school. I love the idea of a 4-year institution where you go to grow up and become an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And part of growing up and becoming an adult is broadening your horizons and engaging with people that you didn't know, and trying out things you've never tried before. So the process of maturing over 4 years in a multi-racial, complex environment is just a very healthy thing for people to do.
Yeah.
Is it worth what we're charging these days? That's a little bit tough.
Yeah.
So at the end of that, you should be well poised to be employed. I believe that, right? So is that. Does everybody need to be working on for Disney? No. That I don't think is, yeah. Um, is the animation industry, have they been good at taking care of artists and doing their own housekeeping? No, they suck at it. AI comes along to an industry that's never done very well in
Mm-hmm.
taking care of its own, and it could be catastrophic.
Yeah.
It really could be. Um, and I I have mixed feelings about that. I love some of the things that have come out, and I have great respect for many of the artists who worked in that industry. But that industry has never been a great model for employment.
Yes.
Um, Part of me is pretty excited that it's going to get disrupted. It's going to get disrupted in a major way. As an independent filmmaker, it takes me 10 years to make a 9-minute film,
Hmm.
and I have to scrape for the resources. I am really excited about the idea that maybe small creative teams can make feature films,
Yeah.
right? Um, will that be I don't know if it has to be AI, but some of these other tools that are coming down the pike, and I think AI is going to have a place in that. But but if you look at it purely from the industry perspective of like how many artists can we replace with a machine,
Hmm.
that's unethical and frightening and probably inevitable, right? But what's it going to get replaced with? We thought stop motion was going to get replaced by CG, and it didn't, right? It came back even harder in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, and now we have two art forms, right? And one's feeding off the other in really interesting ways. I read an article the other day that some of the work that Leica has been doing on the 3D printers is now changing the way they're using 3D printers in the medical
Yeah.
industry. That has never happened before. Animators have always been the ones that have been cobbling off of other industries. So trying to tell the future is really, you know, just suspect. So what I would tell young people is this: lean into your craft and grow as artists, because whether your tool is going to be AI or whether it's going to be some kind of purest traditional medium, you're going to need the aesthetics to drive it,
Hmm.
right? And I'm very impatient with both sides of the AI conversation. What I'm hearing out of the industry is that there is no such thing as an ethical AI. That's crazy. That's driven by fear, right? Or we can't wait to replace all our artists with AI. That's just insane, and I don't think that's going to happen either. So um, it's going to be a few years before this settles, and in the meantime, I'm trying to make work and pay former students to work on my films. Look for opportunities everywhere we can find them. I think that entrepreneurial skills should be taught alongside
Mm.
animation skills and artist skills. And I wish higher ed would rework its curriculum to allow for that, because right now our students are so busy, and many of the things that they are learning are not going to be helpful. So entrepreneurial skills, that would be a thing.
Okay. Yeah, well, yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. Honestly, this was a great to learn a lot of history and a lot of good, I guess, philosophies as well. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Can I plug my film?
Yeah, plug it.
So we are coming up on the last year and a half of production on a film we've been working on for 10 years called The Creation Poem by James Weldon Johnson. It's a 1927 uh, published poem of the creation event as a Black gospel sermon. And next year, 2027, is the 100th anniversary of it. You can find us on Facebook, Creation Poem, and Creation Poem Project, I think. And yeah, keep an eye out for it. It's going to be a graphic novel and a 9-minute animated film. And we're super excited to get it out there.